This program is made possible by annual financial support from viewers like you.
Now, more of us live with cats than live with dogs. And yet, when the cat was domesticated 3,500 years ago in ancient Egypt, our relationship with the dog was already of long standing. Our ancestors, who were hunter-gatherers, had domesticated the dog some 10,000 years ago, but the cat, the much more sensible cat, waited until we were domesticated, waited until we'd invented towns and there was scavengeable waste for them to come in and take from us. And really, they've been exploiting us ever since. And they live around us and have worked for us on farms and around our buildings. And then, around 150 years ago, more and more people began to live with cats in a totally different way. They became pets, and the relationship has grown ever since. And now, of course, the cat in the status of pet is the sort of top animal at this end of the 20th century.
As the cat's role changed to pet, so our relationship became closer. While your cat can convey the essence of contentment and trust, yet it can also show its family's wildness. This apparent contradiction makes it the most enigmatic of animals. And it was the enigmatic and serene qualities that the ancient Egyptians portrayed in the statues of early domestic cats. Qualities we still see in our cats today.
The origins of the cat have been one of those mysteries that have beset people who've had any interest in them at all for centuries. Where did the cat come from? How did it start? Where was it domesticated? Well, this wonderful enigmatic animal that's kept that story tied up in mystery for centuries. Hello, what's that? Mind you don't burn your whiskers. Is what's behind this. In the last century, some wonderful bronzes started to come out of Egypt. And when you look at this animal here, and the neatness with which a cat can sit, you realise that the sculptors of pieces like this knew a lot about the cat. They were familiar with the cat. And it's that very completeness of the essence of cat in the sculptor's mind which tells us that when these started to be made, then people had already stopped thinking of the lioness as the fertility goddess Bastet of ancient Egypt and had come to terms with the small cat. And that's why we think that the point of domestication was 3,500 years ago, because at that point onwards we start to see things like these bronzes, and we begin to see wall paintings, and eventually we start seeing mummified small cats. So it's looking at this very animal that gives us that idea. And yet, why was it so important? If you look back through the records, we know from a writer at the time, Herodotus, that 700,000 people used to attend the annual celebrations of the female cat fertility deity, Bastet, the cat goddess. And if you can imagine that, 700,000, that must have been the bulk of the population of Egypt at the time. And most of the people going along were shaking these rattles. And this is a sistra. It's an object of veneration that you shake to simulate the lovemaking, because the one thing that the people knew about cats was that they went in for lovemaking in a big way. So the fertility deity is very much at the seat of Bastet.
Yet for much of our combined histories, the cat has been a working animal, but not without taking rests. It was Harrison Weir who changed cats' lives. He invented cat shows, the first held in 1871. And cats have been on display ever since. Originally, the domestic cat was found just in the Middle East, while today it lives in large numbers throughout the world and is treasured by cat lovers everywhere.
If you love cats, but don't particularly like dogs, then the chances are when you describe a dog, you'll talk in terms of a sycophantic animal. Whereas somebody who is a dog owner but doesn't like cats will talk of the wonderfully loyal dog. Those same two people, if they talked about a cat, the anti-cat person would talk in terms of nasty standoffish animal. Whereas the person who loves cats is going to talk in terms of the enigmatic, independent animal. It's the same animal in both cases. It's how we perceive the same behaviour. And so it's remarkable that our behaviour as well can interrelate with these two denizens of our household as well as it does, that we all get on as well as we do. Because the ancestry of the dog and the cat couldn't be further apart. The ancestry of the dog through the wolf is of an animal that hunts as a pack, hunts as a group, and as a result of that have to have a hierarchy sorted out beforehand. They can't just sort of come to the kill and decide who's going to be in first, second or third. Everybody knows to know exactly where they are, so there's a top dog, second dog and third dog and so on. But in the world of the cats, in ancient times, the whole of the evolution of the cat family was originally in forest lands. You can't hunt as a group then because you bump into things, so it's the solitary life of the cat when it's the hunter. So when cats do come together, they come together in groups for things like mating and rearing young and so on. And we see that around any farmstead where you'll see groups of cats there together, or semi-feral cats, stray cats, where you get this same reenaction of the early days of the cat. And when you look at those, you don't see the real aggression there sorting things out. What you see, you could use the word affection. And the world of the cat is, because it is based on that affection, lets us in by using the same sort of thing. When we respond to a cat, we use gentle terms, we use affectionate terms, and the cat becomes bonded with us. If we become aggressive with a cat, it doesn't fit in. But the reverse is very often easily said for the dog, that by being firm, the dog knows where it should be. So remarkably, the two aspects of our character allow us to fit into their lives.
My cat sees me as some sort of cat. And realistically, I must admit that I'm bound to see him as some sort of person. The amazing thing is that, given that we are different species, that we are both able to use the same area. Because by being recognised as some sort of cat, I'm able to be incorporated into this whole concept of cat ranges. If you never go into your back garden and you never do as I do, I mean, I often will go out, sit down, take a cup of tea, and it seems to be a purely frivolous activity, but not from the cat's point of view. What's happening is that I'm using the land, I'm declaring my ownership, not by fences, but by usage. And by sitting here and being here, I'm using what's known as the core area, because this is where he and I overlap in our usage of the land. And it's the same sort of thing, if not just drinking tea, but we all know when we go out into the garden and do any work there at all, we very often talk in terms of the curious cat coming up to see what we're doing. But of course, it's exactly the same sort of thing. I'm going out, I am using the land, and therefore I'm declaring that I've got a right to be here. And the cat coming along and sitting beside me will have that shared right to be there.
So whenever we do a spot of weeding in our gardens, our cat will appear as a companion, gaining territorial confidence by our presence. The hunting cat, all alert in its range, will just as readily play with us as chase prey, and follow us around our common range in our garden. The more we use our garden, the more our cat will feel it owns the area as its range, as part of our common overlapping ranges. The same is true inside the house, where the cat has the core of its overlapping range with us. the jungle of our houses are not such strange places for our cats. Domestic living has hardly changed their territorial life.
Hello. When you're out with your cat in the garden, look around and watch very carefully what's happening. Now, this is my own cat, Leroy, and I'm used to following him. And I'm sure you must have seen that he was rubbing against here. He wasn't just coming and sitting down. And the reason that cats do that is because they have scent glands under here, as well as having some on the top of their head and down on their tail. And as they move against something like that, they leave a scent message. And another cat can come along and detect that it is them that have left it before. And so you get this system with cats, whereas a cat will go around, it will mark and go on, and it will have to come back and recheck and reinvestigate the marks that it's left. And by marking like this, these little low-key events, it can leave a territorial route around its range. And by doing that, it can assert its right to be there. It does other things as well, of course. It will spray and so on. But this rather quiet piece of activity, just a gentle rub, is very important. Sometimes it's against something like that that sticks out. Equally, it can be just against odd branches that seem so imperceptible. As you walk along, you can develop a cat's eye and see the sort of thing that a cat would rub against and leave messages and check. If you watch your cat very carefully as it works its way along these scent sticks, you'll notice that some it will seem to go into a curious trance with its mouth slightly agape and focusing inwardly somewhere. What it's doing is tasting scent. It's got an organ just above the roof of its mouth which it can draw the air into, and it's not tasting as we mean taste, and it's not smelling. It's able to do a curious combination of both, and by that it can interpret all sorts of information about the state of the other cats that have been wandering round, and so can really read its territory. What that cat has just done here is try to assert its right to be there. It's a neuter tom, and it's not resident. It's the cat from next door, and it knows it's not on its own patch. And so under the stress of being here, it's trying to spray. It can't give a proper spray because it hasn't got the levels of sex hormones to make that strong aroma, but it's going through all the position. Its tail is up, it's juddering away, and it's far more like normal urination from the volume that's coming through, but nonetheless, from the cat's point of view, because of the pressure, it's really trying to say, I've got a right to be here. Back in its own patch, it won't do that, but here, it certainly is. I'm sure you're familiar with this piece of behaviour where your cat is paddling away on your chest at the same time as purring very loudly. Aren't you, Tabitha? Yes. And in essence, if you wish to understand your cat, where else could you look but this? Because it's the most essential piece of cat behaviour. It's the heart of the cat. If you look at what they're doing when they're paddling, they're behaving as if they're kittens. Now, Tabitha here is about 5.5 years old, so there's no way, by any stretch of the imagination, you're a kitten, are you? No. But nonetheless, she's still behaving as if she is a kitten. And when you look at the size difference between me and her, it's easy to understand why. Because I'm the size that her mother was when she was a kitten. We bring this out in our cats. My great big lap relative to her, with all the warmth that goes up into her, is very reassuring. So of course she settles down and starts paddling away, just as she used to at her mother's teat when she was trying to stimulate that milk flow. But the other thing which is really at that complete heart of understanding your cat is the purr. What is a purr? How is it made? Why do cats purr? If you think about it, people don't purr, cows don't purr, dogs don't purr, and you need to look as much at those other animals to understand why the cat purrs. It is a very, very unusual piece of behaviour. In fact, the understanding of how it even happens, people still debate whether it's blood flow through under the diaphragm. Well, we discount that now. Obviously, we say now, obviously as we change our ideas, it's something to do with the larynx. I think personally it's the outer part of the larynx, because when the kitten is suckling away on the mother's teat, it can make that sound with that part of the larynx with its mouth completely full. So that's a very good contender for how. But why? Well, again, it's back to kittenhood, even when we've got this relationship of a person with a cat. It's reliving part of that kittenhood. When you're a kitten, you're leading a life which is different to that of a cow or a dog or a person. Because the male cat, which we always think of as idle, who does nothing, he goes out, he defends territory, fine. But he doesn't come back with food for the young kittens, and he certainly doesn't take shifts at looking after the kittens. All the workload is down to the mother cat. And so therefore that mother cat, if she's disturbed by anything near her, has to look after the kittens, she has to go out, get the food, leave the kittens alone. Everything about the mother cat and the kittens is almost against the world. And so what they need is some clue, some signal that can operate between the cats, that can be low-key, very quiet, reassuring, and settle the kittens down. So when the mother leaves them, they purr to each other. It's reassuring. We all stay together as a group. When mum comes back, mum purrs and they purr, and it's reassuring, and we all keep quiet, and the rest of the world doesn't know about it. And the wonderful thing is, for the human-cat relationship, that reassurance is there with us. It's not just contentment, it's reliving kittenhood. Yes. One of the great things about a cat is that you don't have to take it for a walk, and you don't have to show it how far it can go. You don't need to draw any territorial limitations, because unlike dogs or gerbils, we can allow the cat to just wander out into the outside world. It has its own very definite territorial limits. Although in this garden there is a hedge over there and Mr. Jones lives beyond, and you've got the same arrangement on the other side, it's not really the hedge that's the limitation to the cat. Because when you think in terms of territory, it's really about defence. And what's the other side of that hedge is Mr. Jones' own cat. And they've come to an agreement as to where one territory starts and the next finishes. But there's also something else called a home range, and they're not quite the same. Come on up, Duke. We often speak of territories and ranges as if they were the same thing, but they're not. A range is the area of land that a cat or any other animal needs to provide enough food to support itself. So if you're a cat living miles from anywhere in north of Scotland and you're living wild, then you really have to hunt over a big area. If you're in London and you're doing the same sort of thing, there's far more food available for you, so you don't need such an area. And a cat like this living in a suburban area gets so much food virtually forced down its throat, it hardly needs any size of garden at all. And yet, having said that, a tomcat like this one will have a range about 10 times the area of an adjacent queen or female cat. Now, why should that be? I know he's a big cat, but he's not 10 times bigger than the adjacent queen. No, it's for social reasons. And what happens is that toms range out over an area within which their queens, if they're part of a group, they can be protective to that area and give those queens a safer area to bring up their young. Now, the strange thing is that when cats live with us, they don't change their behaviour. It's just if you've got a tom in an area, he will look around and see what the size of the adjacent queen's ranges are and then set his size accordingly.
Feral or gone wild cats may live near us, but then support themselves largely by scavenging. Each queen's area will partly overlap with those of others in her group. The much larger range of a tom encompasses the queen's ranges. And although he does not directly provide food for their kittens, the Tom's larger range protects the females from other cats. The same basic pattern is true of our domestic living house cats, as they claim their ranges in our gardens, except that they behave towards us as if we are cats with ranges. The queens overlap their ranges with us, and so use our gardens. Toms overlap their ranges with their owners, but also cover a number of queens' ranges. Unfortunately for the Toms, queens identify with their owners as if they are members of their own cat group. So poor old Toms are made to feel a little like outsiders in the domestic landscape.
However big or small your garden is, the chances are that your cat will not use all of it. And yet, in his movements around, scent will be extremely important, but not always in the most obvious ways. For example, if Sylvester did not live here, the chances are that the neighbouring cats on either side would use this garden as a communal latrine, because they tend to scent mark by digging holes and leaving their dung as a means of declaring the edges of their territory. And if you've got a dispute between a couple of Toms, then they may not even bury their droppings, their feces. They may leave them prominently sighted. And so in that sense, scent becomes a very important part of what's going on. But there are other things as well. Sylvester spends a lot of time snoozing. He's quite an elderly cat. But cats of all ages do exactly the same thing, because unlike a dog, in hot weather, they can't just run around and then flop down, panting away. Their means of controlling their temperature is to not get too hot in the first place. So fine, they'll have warming spots where they can bask in the sun, but then they'll move to a shady spot. And this moving around means that they have very definite places that they go to, and each of these gains the scent of their fur, so other cats again know they're around. But there's also an even more curious way that the cat's scent gets around, because the fur means that the cat can't sweat through its skin. It wouldn't function very well like that. How the cat loses some of its heat and some of its scent as a result is through its paws. They are slightly sweaty and therefore slightly smelly. So when your cat goes around and claws on a fence and marks it and leaves a spot where another cat can come along and check, it also leaves a residual scent as well. So your cat may be using a tree, but it may also be going along the top of a fence and clawing away. Or outside your house, you may have straw matting. The cat may use that. All sorts of places in and around your house, the cat will be leaving scent. Hello, hello. We all know how cows will change their position from lying down or standing up, depending on how the weather's going to be. And similarly, we understand how cats change their behaviour when there's likely to be a change in the weather. We often use the expression, oh, the cat's got the wind up its tail, when there's a gust of wind around. But what we can understand today, and what people thought in the past, are two totally different things. You see, we can sort out cause and effect, but that hasn't always been as clear. I mean, here's a natural barometer, if you like, of how the weather conditions change. A pine cone, when it's going to be dry conditions, then it's nice and open, and when it's wet, it's fairly tight and closed. And we can understand that relates to exactly how the weather is now, not in the future. The poor old cat's problem was that it seemed to be seeing into the future.
And if you're doing that in medieval times or later, that seemed to be that you were in league with the devil, you had uncanny powers. What the cat did, and I'm sure you may have seen this yourself, was when the weather is changing and the skies are darkening, it would rub over its ear into this little dip just down there. Just down there. There you are, little one. It must be the least washed part of a cat's body, because although it will rub everywhere else, that bit it seems to reserve just for when the weather is going to go into rain. Now, why should it be so? And it can do this for even up to 24 hours ahead, before the skies have even changed. Well, of course, barometers do that. They can detect pressure changes, and within our ears, as well as the cat's ears, we've got the facility to do that. The great thing about the cat is, of course, that it has the ability to show that it can detect it. Whether the cat acts on it, we don't know, but that it showed it meant, of course, that it was suspicious, and that just increased the probability that it was in league with witchcraft, devilry, and everything evil. When cats meet and greet, there's a body language going on which they understand. And if you use your eyes, you can get into that world yourself. Look how your cat greets you. The tail pops up, and when you rub along their back, as we always do when we meet our cats, we're helping to reinforce this hello as they rub around. And so we've got a sort of mutual friendship and admiration society going on. But there's another aspect to the cat's way of life and how it uses that body language. When that tail fluffs up dramatically in that full way and they arch that back, then you can either have a defending cat or an aggressive cat. You all know that sound, but look what's going on. Look at the ears. Who's the aggressor? If they're just going down flat to the head, then that's an animal that's going into a defensive posture. But if they're going down flat but with a kink, so you can see the top back of the ears to the front, then that's the aggressor. It seems so similar, but to the cat, it's totally different. Look also at the eyes. In the defending cat, the eyes are wide open with terror. But in the aggressor, they are tight shut with its forward movement, threatening posture, and that posture is so important. The aggressor goes sideways on, it looks larger, its head is turning as it's ready to throw itself onto that other cat. The defending cat, who's really worried, will go down on its back, and as the aggressor comes on top, it will rake with its back paws on the underside. And you'll get that so familiar as they fight.
The defender's ears are flattened back. The aggressors are rotated, so their backs are seen from the front. He moves around, at an angle, waiting for his chance to leap on. The aggressor's tail agitates. The defender stays on her back, ready to rake and kick. The defender breaks off. The point having been made, the aggressor does not push it unnecessarily, with the needless risk of injury to himself. And ruffled fur settles down. In adult life, the cat's hunting ability comes to the fore. As a kitten, Leroy learnt about hunting, and now he's incredibly efficient. The worm that was caught by the early bird was grabbed by Leroy at the same split second that he caught the fledgling as it was being fed by its parent. Many cat lovers are upset when their cat brings home a bird, but the reality is that cats catch very few birds in comparison to their number of animals like mice. A game of nerve develops between predator and prey. We think that the cat is just playing with the prey instead of getting on and killing it. But the cat is trying to avoid being injured, as some prey have sharp teeth. So it allows it to try to escape, to see how subdued the prey is. The catch and recapture goes on. Leroy is suddenly displaced from his prey by Tabitha, but she was not trained in kittenhood to hunt, so does not really know what to do. The bird wisely remains frozen. As Tabitha has taken the bird, so we do when our cat brings one home. Yet cats still bring prey back to their patch, where they best know the terrain. In a feral group, or among garden cats, they stand to lose their prey to those other cats. But a great advantage is that learning doesn't completely stop at kittenhood. So although she's not as good as Leroy, Tabitha has learnt something about prey by Leroy's bringing prey back. So group skills and survival improves. But the policy of remaining stock still has worked for the young robin. From time to time, it sneaks a look, even when Leroy is back on the scene. It waits for its opportunity to escape. Flown to freedom, not an uncommon result, which is why it really is a two-sided, if macabre, game. But it's not all over. The cat, who was only an onlooker, carefully checks out the scenes of the action, reliving in its mind Leroy's hunt.
It's hard to beat having a cat gym in your house for bringing entertainment both into your cat's life and into yours. And just think how important it is, particularly if you have a cat which is a housebound cat. Think what you're doing. You're depriving the cat of the ability to get up. Because most of the time we say to cats, get down off the table or get down off that sofa. And yet the very heart of a cat is saying, get up, clamber up those trees, chase after those birds. And so to have something like this, which is the cat's own personal place, is wonderful. They can get up with a total secure knowledge that that's okay. And it's also something else, because in this direct communication of play that you can have with your cat, the cat also knows it's a place where you play with them, so they can ask, in effect, to play with you by getting up there. And before we get too pompous about how we're extending the play part of a cat's life and therefore getting them back into kittenhood, of course that's exactly what we're doing ourselves. When we are playing, we are reliving, both of us, our juvenile past, and it's good for us. Come on, you. Come on, come on.
There is a joy in play for its own sake, but in kittenhood, play is a rehearsal for the adult world. It's common in young mammals, particularly in social ones or carnivores like cats. If our cats grow up without these playful interactions with kittens or humans, they're less able to socialize in later life. But for us, there are few things more endearing than playing with kittens. These kittens discovered in their play the moves they'll use in adult territorial fights before they were weaned. Then they began to practice hunting actions. But now, at 12 weeks old, they have the full spectrum of play to employ as they rush and clamber about. But although we normally see play as a social event, the young cat will focus on pretend play by itself. Play largely fades in adult life, but even alone, adults will still play. Yet playing with your adult cat will increase this part of its activities. As it pursues pretend prey, you keep its kittenish interest and strengthen your mutual bond.
You're watching PBS.
This program is made possible by annual financial support from
Today is a special day. For you, it's special because you've just taken delivery of your new Chevrolet. For us, it's special because you chose our dealership. Because we appreciate the trust you've placed in us, this videotape is a way of saying thanks. We appreciate your business, and we hope you'll continue to rely on us as a partner in protecting your new investment. To get the most from your new Chevrolet, there are certain maintenance procedures that must be performed, and that's where the partnership comes in. It's up to you to be sure that you follow the requirements called for in the maintenance schedule that comes with your new Chevrolet. And it's up to us to offer the necessary parts and services you may need. This videotape shows you how to perform some of the maintenance procedures and checks yourself. And it also points out the more complex procedures that should be entrusted to the professional technicians here at the dealership. Our parts department carries an extensive inventory of genuine GM parts and accessories that provide long, trouble-free service life for your Chevrolet. And our trained parts department staff will help you select the parts you need. It's been said that for most folks, other than buying a house, a new car or truck is the largest purchase they'll ever make. Because your new Chevrolet represents a sizable investment, you're going to want to take care of it for two good reasons. First, to ensure reliable, trouble-free use of your Chevrolet. To cite just one example, did you know that in some cases a tire is considered seriously underinflated if it's just 4 pounds low? And underinflation is the tire's greatest enemy. The second reason to maintain and care for your new Chevrolet is to ensure maximum value at trade-in time. According to some used vehicle industry statistics, an extra clean used vehicle may be worth up to twice as much as one in rough condition. The difference between rough and extra clean is care and maintenance, which is what the remainder of this tape is about. For your convenience, we've divided the tape into 6 modules. 1, warranty, maintenance schedule, and owner's manual. 2, inside the vehicle. 3, under hood. 4, exterior. 5, on the road emergencies. And 6, under the vehicle. Also, for your convenience, the number of each module remains in the upper right-hand corner throughout the module. So you can spot it easily by using your tape player's fast-forward viewing mode. This video was designed to answer many questions you may have about your new Chevrolet. But remember, you should also become familiar with your owner's manual and maintenance schedule and use them as a convenient reference. Now, let's begin.
Hey, you missed a spot.
Where?
Right there.
I don't see it.
Yeah, right
You can-
there.
Boy,
Well, you
look at
kids
the
are
sun.
sure busy this afternoon.
Hey, Dad.
Hi, Dad.
What a great afternoon to be outdoors.
Yeah.
Beautiful day. Good day to be washing my car. Look.
Yes, I'm proud of both of you the way you're taking care of your new Chevrolets. Of course, you realize that there's a little more to it than just the waxing and the polishing.
Oh, here it comes.
Scott, don't interrupt. Go on, Dad. I really would like to know more about it.
Thank you, Jessica. Actually, Scott, you are right. The washing and polishing is important. But in my mind, I was thinking more about maintenance and service.
Hey, what's that?
Ah, these are a few little goodies that I got together so that we can be certain that those new Chevrolets are getting the best possible care. Now, we have your basic oils and lubricants. We have cleaners
Oh, yeah.
and polishers from your Chevrolet dealer. We have flares. We have shop rags. We have, for this young gentleman right here, the handsome young man, pair of gloves.
Oh, great, thanks.
Oh, now look what we have for you. Jumper cables and a tire pressure gauge, young lady.
And is all of this really necessary?
All of this is really necessary. That is, if you want to get the most out of your new Chevrolet car and truck. Well, let me explain.
Well, wait, Dad. Let me get some paper and I'll take some notes.
No, that won't be necessary, Scott. Everything that you need to know about how to take care of your new Chevrolets is right in the glove box. The owner's manual, your maintenance schedule, and the warranty information. And you know, Chevrolet really provides extensive warranty coverage on all their new cars and trucks. This new GM warranty covers everything except the tires and routine maintenance.
And this is good for how long?
3 years or 50,000 miles, and that covers the engines and the transmissions, too. And there's a 6-year, 100,000-mile warranty against body rust through.
But what about the tires?
Oh, the tires are covered separately by the tire manufacturer. Oh, and there's one other thing. After the first 12,000 miles, there's a $100 deductible on each warranty visit. And they also give you the responsibility to be sure that the necessary maintenance and service is done at the times and mileages in the maintenance schedule.
Maintenance schedule. Sounds helpful.
Right here in the front of the book is a list of items that should be serviced on a regular basis. And right alongside of each one, it tells you how often they should be done.
Okay, I'm still not clear. Are these things we're supposed to do ourselves?
No. A lot of them are things that you can do yourself. Others are things that you would go back to your Chevrolet dealership to have done. But there's also a list of many items that you can do yourself, and most of them are really very simple things that you just have to watch out for.
Like what, for example?
Well, abnormal brake operation, unusual vibration, loud exhaust, things that you will notice right away which need attention, and your Chevrolet dealer will help fix them. Now, there's also a list of items that you need to check on a regular basis, such as engine oil, other fluids, tire pressures.
Okay, Dad, we get the point.
Do you suppose you could show us how to do some of these things?
Sure, why not? Let's start right here on the inside. First, take a good look at the instrument panel. Now, turn the key on. Don't start it up yet, though.
Okay, there are several lights here. Service engine soon, low coolant, picture of a seatbelt.
All right, now, start the engine and watch what happens.
Okay, several more lights came on, then they all went out. That's what's supposed to happen, right?
That's exactly right. When you're cranking the engine, they all come on as a bulb check. If one of them is out, that probably means that the bulb is burned out. Then when the engine starts running, they all go out. Unless something goes wrong, and then a light comes on to tell you so. You can turn it off now.
Okay.
You know, the gauges and warning lamps are a little different on the truck.
That's right. And that's why I suggest that you both study the lights and gauges in your owner's manuals so that you know what each one is for. All right, now, what do you know about fuses?
Well, when we go to the cottage and turn on too many lights, the fuses blow out. Is that what you mean?
Well, no, that's not exactly what I had in mind, Scott. I'm talking about the kind of fuses that they use in cars and in trucks. Like those.
Oh.
Many of the circuits in the car are protected by fuses like that. So if someday something doesn't work, maybe your radio or the turn signals, chances are a fuse has been blown.
But there's so many of them.
You're right, Scott, there are a lot of them. But you'll find an illustration in the back of your owner's manual that will help you identify each of them. And some Chevrolets, like this one, have a chart right inside the fuse panel cover. Tells you what each one is. Now, once you've determined which fuse controls the circuit that's not operating, you pull out the fuse and replace it with one just like it. What you do is buy a replacement fuse that has the same amp number stamped on the end of it.
And that'll fix the radio.
It should. But if the new fuse blows out too,
Go back to the Chevrolet dealer, right?
that's exactly right. And I also think it's a pretty good idea to keep a small box of spare fuses in the glove box, just in case. All right. Let's move around to the front and see what we can check under the hood. Now, actually, there are a lot of things that you can check under the hood, and a few things that you can do something about, like adding fluids. If you should find something under the hood that looks like it needs repair, take the vehicle back to your Chevy dealer.
That's clear enough.
So, where do we start?
The engine oil. Now, the old cliche is that the oil is the engine's lifeblood. And you know, that's really true, because not only does the oil lubricate all those moving parts inside, it also helps cool the engine. So, not only is it important to have enough oil, but the right kind of oil.
Okay, there's something I'm not clear on. If the oil gauge or the oil light on the dashboard say that everything is okay, then why check the oil? Isn't it full already?
That's a good question, Jess. That's something a lot of people misunderstand. The instrument panel only tells you if there's enough oil pressure. The oil level can become dangerously low before the oil pressure drops. So we check the oil level directly using the dipstick. Now, in order to do that, you shut off the engine and you let it set for a couple of minutes so that the oil drains back into the engine. Then, well, you know, like when you're putting gas in it, or first thing in the morning?
Yeah.
All right. Now, this Chevrolet engine, as most Chevrolet engines, has engine oil printed right on the handle of the dipstick.
That makes it easy enough to see. But exactly what does the dipstick do?
Oh, well, the end of the dipstick reaches down into the pool of oil inside the engine, and when you pull the dipstick out, it's registered the depth of that oil. Here, why don't you go ahead and try it? Pull the dipstick out.
Okay.
And wipe it off with that cloth. That's right. Now put it back in. Push it all the way down and wait for just a moment. Then pull it back out again, only this time, look at the end of it and you'll see the reading for the depth of the oil.
Look at that. I can see the oil level right up to there. Looks full enough to me.
Yeah, but what if it's not in the area marked full?
As long as the oil level is between the upper and lower marks, it's okay. Now, if it's below the bottom mark, then you have to add a quart of oil. And if it should be above the full mark, then someone's put too much oil in, and it's a good idea to take your car back to the dealership and have them check it out.
Is there some sort of special oil that we should use?
Well, as a matter of fact, you should always be very careful, Jess, that you use a good quality name brand oil. Now, this is Good Wrench oil, but no matter what brand you use, always look for this oil identification logo.
SGCC. Hey, does that mean that this Good Wrench oil is so good?
Well, I suppose you could say that. It does tell you that this oil has passed some very strict test requirements. And Chevrolet insists that you use only oil rated SGCC or SGCD. The manual explains more about that.
Hey, look. There's an oil identification logo on that filler cap too, Dad.
That's right. Handy there for you to see as a reminder anytime you have to remove it.
And Dad, what does this 5W30 stand for? Is that important too?
You bet. That number is the oil's viscosity. That has to do with how thick the oil is when the engine is cold. Now, Chevrolet recommends a 5W30 oil as a good year-round oil for your car. Now, the manual mentions other viscosities, but those may be for other engines or other parts of the country.
Wow. There sure is a lot to remember about engine oil, Dad.
Scott, don't worry about it. It's not that bad, and if you do forget, remember, it's always in your owner's manual.
Now, Dad, what about oil changes? How often do you have to do that?
And why do you have to change it at all? I mean, I hear oil never really wears out.
Boy, those are both good questions. Let's take them one at a time. Yours first, Scott. Now, when the engine's running, the oil does more than just lubricate. It's also absorbing moisture and dirt and even unburned gasoline. Eventually, it just gets too dirty. Now, as to when you change the oil, the maintenance schedule sets out the recommendations for that, and it depends on what your driving conditions are. Now, for instance, if you drive a lot of short trips in cold weather, or if you haul a trailer or drive in dusty conditions, then they recommend that the oil be changed every 3,000 miles or 3 months. Now, Schedule 2 tells you that under less severe driving conditions, the maximum interval is 7,500 miles or 12 months. And the maintenance schedule also explains how often you should change your oil filter.
Wait a minute, just how do I change the oil and filter?
Well, Jess, that is one of those things that you could do yourself, but this is one of those jobs for your Chevrolet dealer. He has all the right lifting equipment, and he's got the necessary equipment for draining the oil, and they have the know-how to do it quickly and correctly.
That is a relief. Okay, what's next?
How about the automatic transmission fluid? And Jess, let's see if you can find the dipstick.
There's a handle up there that says trans fluid. Is that it?
That's exactly right. Now, unlike the engine oil, in order to check the automatic transmission fluid, the engine must be running. Scott, why don't you get in the car and set the parking brake for us?
Okay, Dad.
Step on the foot brake first and then set the parking brake. Make sure the automatic transmission's in park and go ahead and start the engine. We need to let it idle for a couple of minutes. And it's always important that when the engine's running, you stay in the driver's seat. So, Scott, you're going to have to stay in there for a while. All right, Jess, now be very careful of the drive belts.
Okay.
Now, feel the fluid, and if it's cold, we'll need to leave the engine idle a little longer.
Feels warm to me. And the fluid level seems to be in the checkerboard area.
All right, that's good. If the fluid level is in the crosshatched or checkerboard area, it's fine. But if it were low,
I'd add some more oil, right?
That's exactly right, but not just any oil. The automatic transmission requires only Dexron 2 fluid. Any other kind of fluid would be wrong. Scott, you can go ahead and turn off the engine now. If it needs fluid, you pour it down the filler neck tube where the dipstick goes. But be very careful that you don't add any unless it absolutely needs it. Be very careful not to overfill it because the fluid could burp out and cause a fire.
I feel left out here. The truck has a manual transmission. Now, how do I check it?
Manual transmissions, transaxles, and transfer cases all use various other lubricants, as do drive axles on rear drive cars and pickup trucks. All this is explained in your owner's manual. And generally speaking, these are services that require hoisting the car. So that's a wonderful job for Mr. Goodrich at the dealership. Scott, there is something that you can check on a Chevrolet with a manual transmission, and that's the fluid level for the hydraulic clutch. And you can see the level right through the side of the reservoir.
Yeah, it looks full all right, but what would I use if it were low?
Your owner's manual recommends using GM brake fluid, and that's available at your dealership. All right, now let's go back over to Jessie's car and see if she can find the power steering fluid reservoir.
There it is, marked as clear as anything.
If the fluid is hot to the touch, then the proper level is between hot and cold. If it's at room temperature, then the proper level is between add and cold.
What kind of oil do I use if it's low?
Your manual recommends using GM power steering fluid, and that's available at your Chevy dealer.
Okay, but what does fluid have to do with power steering anyway?
It works like this. When the engine is running, a belt operates a pump that supplies pressurized fluid to the steering gear. And when you turn the steering wheel, that pressurized fluid gives you a power assist. Once the fluid is through the steering gear, it returns again to the reservoir for reuse.
Okay, I understand that. Now, are there any other fluids that need to be checked?
Yes. Brake fluid, for one. It's very important that you have the proper brake fluid level if you want the brakes to be able to stop your vehicle properly. Now, there are several different kinds of brake fluid reservoirs on Chevrolets. Some of them have a side viewing window. Others have a filler cap that you have to remove.
And I bet there's a special fluid for brakes, too, right?
Yes, brake fluid must meet the DOT-3 specifications. For instance, Delco Supreme number 11, and that's available at your local dealership. Now, some cautions to be aware of when you're dealing with brake fluid. First of all, we don't ever use fluid from a partially filled can. That's because it can absorb moisture, and that affects how the brake system operates. Secondly, be very careful about not getting dirt in the fluid. And never let brake fluid drip on the paintwork.
And just how does brake fluid help stop the car?
All right, when you put your foot on the brake pedal, you're sending pressurized fluid through the brake lines to all four wheels. The brakes are engaged, and the vehicle stops. All right, next is the washer fluid and the engine coolant. Now, the lids are very clearly marked so that you can keep them separate because they do very different jobs. Now, the engine coolant is what cools the engine when it's running, and that's the fluid that you'll find in the radiator. An engine-driven pump circulates the hot coolant from the engine to the radiator where it's cooled. Then it's pumped back into the engine again so it can absorb more heat, and the process repeats itself.
So the radiator has just water?
Oh, no. No, absolutely not. The fluid mixture in the radiator is a combination of water and ethylene glycol-based antifreeze. And in most parts of the country, that's a 50-50 mixture. Now, your dealer can tell you if you live in a part of the country that gets so much colder that you would need additional antifreeze. And even then, the maximum mixture is 70% antifreeze and 30% water.
When you buy antifreeze, is it already mixed with the right amount of water?
That's a good question, Scott. No, it's not. And that's why we don't ever pour undiluted antifreeze directly into the car. We always mix it in a separate container first. In fact, I keep a jug on the shelf in the garage marked 50-50 coolant just for that purpose. And I keep it on a high shelf so that little children and pets can't reach it because it is very poisonous.
So once we have the antifreeze mixed, where do I pour it? Into the radiator?
Before you pour anything, a couple of cautions. Unless there's something seriously wrong with your cooling system elsewhere, the only thing that you have to do to check the coolant is to look at the side of the reservoir. If it needs some, you pour it in right there. Now, secondly, never remove the radiator cap if the radiator or the engine is hot to the touch, because scalding fluid or steam could blow out and burn you, and if it should accidentally spill on the hot engine, it could start a fire. So, look at the engine coolant reservoir. You can see right through it at what the level is. Now, if the engine is cold, the level should be at the cold mark. Now, when the engine is hot, then that level should be a little higher. Looks like you need just a little fluid, Jess.
You're right, it does.
All right, that's good. Pretty
Okay.
simple, eh?
It sure is.
So how often does this have to be done?
Well, the rule of thumb is that you check your coolant level every time you check the engine oil. And if you find that you're adding engine coolant more than 4 times a year, or if it appears to be dirty, then it would be a good idea to go back to the dealership and have them check out your cooling system.
Okay.
All right, now, one more fluid level to check, and that's the windshield washer fluid, and that's a solvent and water combination.
Sounds like antifreeze to me.
Me too.
Oh, now, not so fast, guys. Now, the windshield washer solvent is not the same as what goes in the cooling system. Now, GM makes a specially formulated windshield washer solvent called GM OptiClean. It's just for cleaning windshields. Keeps the water from freezing in the wintertime, and it has detergents in it to help remove road grime and bugs from the glass.
There doesn't seem to be a full mark on that container.
Right. So you would just fill it as close to the top as you can without overflowing it. Put the lid on securely so you keep the dirt out.
I think it looks full.
Yep, looks great.
Good.
Now, let's move on to some of the mechanical things that we can check.
Like tune-ups and stuff, right, Dad?
No, Scott, like drive belts. Let me explain what I mean.
Is this what they call fan belt?
In some vehicles, like Scott's truck, the belts do drive the fan. But in other vehicles, like yours, the fan is electrically operated. So really a better term is accessory drive belt. You see, it operates the power steering, the air conditioner, the generator, the water pump, so you can see just how important it really is. Now, one thing to be very careful about. Some electric fans can operate when the engine is turned off, so be extremely careful around them.
Well, it sounds like I wouldn't be able to drive the car if the accessory drive belt was worn out.
That's exactly right, and that's another good reason why you should occasionally take a very good look at it.
Well, just what am I looking for?
It's a good idea to look at accessory drive belts when they're brand new. Then you have some idea what they're supposed to look like. In time, you're going to look for fraying and chafing, crumbling rubber, cracks, things like that.
And if I find something wrong, it's off to the dealer for repairs.
That's right.
Does this belt ever get loose?
Well, on your car, it's set up so that it's adjusted automatically, so it doesn't require any periodic attention. There may be a manual adjustment for some other engines, though, and squeaks or pulsating power steering or an undercharged battery are indications that there's a belt adjustment job in store for your dealer. Now, anybody got any idea what this is?
This metal can?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's got a lid on top, but I have no idea what's in there.
All right, that is your engine's air filter. Scott, why don't you undo the wing, take off the lid, and we'll give it a look-see. All right, take it out. There it is.
So, this is the air filter.
That's right.
It's nice and clean.
Well, it should be. This is a relatively new car. But the more you drive, the dirtier it will get. And it's recommended that you change it, put a new one in, every 30,000 miles. Now, it's possible that it could get very dirty before that, and it's no problem to replace it with a new one. Now, that's something that you can have the dealer do, or you can do it yourself. Just stop in at the dealer, go to the parts department, and ask for the air filter for your specific engine. And another thing that's very important about air filters, never drive your car without the air filter in place, because it acts as a flame arrestor in case of a backfire.
Dad, I keep expecting you to mention something about tune-ups. Can we get to that now?
Okay, Scott, you're right. And the maintenance schedule does mention a number of services and inspections that need to be done. And they do help keep your engine running better. They help control exhaust emissions.
Well, what kind of services and inspections?
Oh, well, let's see. There's spark plugs, spark plug wires, engine timing, PCV valves, the EGR system.
Whoa, wait a minute. This is all alphabet soup to me. I'll bet we take those things back to the dealer. And you say the maintenance schedule tells me how often it's needed?
That's right. There's only one more thing left. That's to take a very close look around at everything under the hood, make sure everything is in its right place. What you're looking for is to be sure that all the plastic parts and rubber parts aren't where they can touch any hot part of the engine. And that brings us to the exterior of the car, and here we're going to find the hinges and latches for the hood, the doors, the trunk lid, or hatch. And it's one of those simple maintenance projects that you really can do yourself, and it doesn't take a lot of product to get the job done. You need a dispenser can with some non-detergent engine oil, a little grease, some light oil, and some spray lubricant. It's important to check the instructions on each of those. Now, the hood's a good place to start.
Here, let me help you with this, Jess.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Jess, start out by putting a little dab of grease on that hood latch. Apply a little lubricant to each hood hinge. Now work the hood up and down a few times to distribute it. Now, a few drops of oil on the door hinges. And it's a good idea to lubricate the lock cylinders once in a while. Just spray the lubricant on the key and insert it in the lock. Of course, it's important to use the recommended lubricants for this, and it's the light oil for the black lock cylinders, and it's the silicone lubricant for all of the others. Oh, and by the way, they don't recommend using graphite. Well, that brings us to the washing, polishing, and waxing.
Right, and there's something we already know about. Is there more?
Well, you know, washing is a very good way to protect the investment that you have in your new car. It helps get rid of the dirt and the road grime and the atmospheric residue on the finish. But it's very important that you never wash the car unless the body is cool, which means don't wash it in direct sunlight. And always use cold or lukewarm water. That's so that it doesn't dry out before you get a chance to rinse it. Never use harsh chemicals or strong soaps. And be sure that when you're done, you completely rinse off everything. GM offers a wash concentrate that's specifically formulated for the finish of your car, and all you have to do is follow the directions on the label. Which brings us to the polishing and waxing. And recommended products are available from your GM dealer. In fact, GM provides a complete line of car care products. And I just happen to have the complete assortment on a shelf right over there in the garage.
On that shelf?
That's the one. And if those run out, your dealer can provide replacements.
Let's see here. We have tar and road oil remover, chrome cleaner and polish, tire cleaner, vinyl cleaner, fabric cleaner, glass cleaner, dry spot remover, spot lifter, magic mirror cleaner and polish, and protectant. Hey, Dad, has anyone ever accused you of being, like, too clean?
Never. Absolutely never. Oh, here's a little something for you to help take care of your tires.
A tire pressure gauge. Oh, you shouldn't have.
Oh,
Gee, thanks.
yes, I should have. Checking tire pressure is a very important item, and many people just, well, they don't bother to take the time to do it. And running tires underinflated makes them wear out a lot sooner than they should. And also running underinflated tires wastes a lot of gasoline, as much as 30 or 40 cents a tank full. So checking tire pressure regularly is a very important item. Let's go over to your truck, Scott, and check your tire pressure.
Okay.
This is something you want to check once a month, and certainly just before taking a trip.
Okay, Dad, but how do you use this thing anyway?
Start by taking the cap off the valve stem. All right, now don't lose it because you need that to keep dirt out of that valve. All right, now line up the open end of the gauge square with the valve stem and just press it into place. Whoops, now if it keeps hissing like that, it means you haven't got it on there square, so you have to start over again. All right, what does it read?
Well, it looks like it's about 35, but what does that mean anyway?
All right, the gauge reads the tire pressure in pounds per square inch, so that means 35 pounds per square inch. The tire pressure sticker inside your car will tell you that this car should have 35 pounds per square inch. So this tire has the right amount in it. If it didn't, then you'd have to go to the service station and add some air. Oh, and it's very important that you always check the spare. I mean, it's not going to be any good in an emergency if it's flat. Now, before we start talking about on-the-road emergencies, it's a good idea to pack up an emergency kit.
Sounds good to me, but what goes into it?
Well, let's take this old gym bag and start out by putting your tire pressure gauge in it.
Gee, thanks.
A pair of gloves, some road flares, and a flashlight, jumper cables, some shop rags, a quart of oil is a good idea too, and some wheel blocks.
This is great. This bag is small enough to fit in the trunk without taking up a lot of extra space.
And it's worth its weight in gold if you ever need it. Now, let's pretend that this front tire is flat. Let's say you accidentally ran over a nail.
You don't want me to change the tire now?
Yes, change the tire now. I think that's a lot better while I can be here to advise you than waiting for that cold and rainy night.
It's true.
All right, Scott, we need to get everything out of the trunk first. That's so that we won't have to jostle the car later while it's up on the jack. Now, there's a spare tire, a jack, a wrench, and a socket.
Okay, Dad.
Okay, what's the plan?
Well, the plan is to go right back to the owner's manual. Chevrolet provides very detailed instructions, complete with pictures, and all I'm really going to do is talk you through it.
Okay.
Now, before we take anything apart, some precautions. Always follow the directions exactly. Never get anywhere underneath the vehicle when it's supported only by the jack. And don't ever run the car engine when it's supported on the jack. And when you're all done, put everything away according to the directions on the sticker.
You know what, Dad? This spare tire looks a little smaller than the one on the car. Now, is that right?
Sure. They use the compact spare because it reduces weight and also takes up less space in the trunk. However, they're designed for only minimum usage, which is 3,000 miles maximum. So it's very important that you get your regular tire repaired and replaced on your vehicle as soon as possible. All right, now, the vehicle is sitting on level ground. That is very important. The next thing we do is to make sure that the automatic transmission is in park. Or in the case of a manual transmission, like on your pickup truck, Scott, that it's in reverse. If it's a four-wheel drive vehicle, we check to make sure that the transfer case is not in neutral. Then, we set the parking brake and turn on the hazard flashers. Except today, because we're in the driveway, I guess we can skip the flashers. Now, Scott, I want you to block the front and rear of the wheel diagonally opposite the one that's flat.
With what?
Well, anything that you can find wherever you might be. It might be a piece of wood, several large stones, anything that's handy. But today, we'll use the wheel blocks that we've got right here in our emergency kit.
Okay, Dad.
All right, now that's the wheel diagonally opposite the one we're going to change. Start by placing the jack with the base firmly on the flat ground. Then use the wrench to turn the jack. When the jack touches the notch in the vehicle, stop turning it. And then check to make sure that it's seated in the right position. Good. Now, take the wrench and begin loosening the lug nuts on the wheel. Now, you just want to loosen them a couple of turns, but don't take them all the way off yet. And the weight of the vehicle will help keep things steady while you're loosening those lug nuts. And be sure that you loosen them in the star pattern.
Okay.
All right, now you take the wrench back to the jack and continue turning the jack until the wheel just clears the ground.
How's that?
That's good.
Okay.
Now you go back and take off the lug nuts. And be careful that you don't lose them.
Last one.
And now you can lift the wheel off. Good job. Now we can put the spare on the mounting lugs. And you can put the lug nuts back on.
How about that one? Is that all right?
Sure. Be sure that the cone-shaped end of the lug nut faces toward the wheel.
But how do I know when the lug nuts are tight enough?
Well, just wiggle the wheel just a little bit and make sure that it's as snug as you can get it with your fingers.
I think
Now,
it
if
is.
your fingers aren't strong enough to do that, then you can use the socket portion of the wrench to tighten them a little bit, but we're not going to tighten them down all the way yet.
Okay.
All right, now you take your socket and your wrench and you go back to the jack and you carefully let the vehicle back down to the ground so that all the weight is being supported by the spare tire. And finally, finish tightening the lug nuts.
Okay, but how do I know when they're tight enough?
Well, the idea, Jess, is to get them reasonably tight. Then at your first opportunity, you stop in at a service center and have the technician check the lug nut torque. That information is in your owner's manual.
You know, Dad, now I know where you take the car back to the dealership to get the tires rotated. That is a lot of hard work.
Yes, it is. And tire rotation is very important, especially for good tread life. In fact, Chevrolet recommends that you rotate the tires on a regular basis. But it's up to you to keep track of the mileage and see to it that your car gets in for those service adjustments. And there's a log in your owner's manual for keeping track of that.
You know, I'm pretty tired after all that. Do you think we could take a break and get some lunch? Come on.
Yeah, I guess that's a good idea.
Let's go.
Why
Come on.
not? Good lunch. Taking a break was a good suggestion, Jess. Now, let's get back to talking about our on-the-road emergencies. Someday you're going to find the need to have your engine jump start because the battery's low.
Well, how would the battery get low, Dad?
Well, there's lots of things that can cause that, Scott. Maybe you forget and leave the headlights on all day. Or maybe you run a lot of electrical accessories and the engine is shut off. And of course, something could go wrong with the charging system on your vehicle. Now, your Chevy dealer can help pinpoint the cause, but in order to get there...
You have to get a jump start first.
Right.
And that's what the jumper cables are for.
Exactly.
But I have no idea where they go.
All right, we're going to talk through and do the whole process. Then anything that you forget, you'll find the details in your owner's manual. Now, some cautions. Shield your eyes. Never lean over the battery. And be very careful to keep flames and sparks out of the way. Let's get those hoods open.
Okay.
Now, we want the vehicles fairly close together, but it's important that they not touch. We have to be close enough so that the cables will reach from one battery to the other battery. All right, next, several things we have to do with both vehicles. Shut off the ignitions, turn off all the lights that we don't need. Jess, we need to put your transmission in park. Scott, your transmission, being manual, should be in neutral. Now, if we had a four-wheel drive vehicle, we'd check the transfer case to be certain that it is not in neutral. And put on the parking brake. Let's get that done now. Now, just for the sake of argument, we'll pretend that the battery in Scott's truck is charged and the battery in your car, Jess, is discharged. We're ready to start with the cables. And we begin with your end of the cable, Scott. Clamp the red cable on the positive terminal of your charged battery.
Okay, red on red.
Then the other end of the red cable goes on the positive terminal of your discharged battery.
Got it.
Good. Now we're off to the black one. Scott, that goes on the negative terminal of your charged battery. But it's different for you, Jess. You are going to clamp the black cable onto a lug or heavy-duty bracket on the engine. Here's one right here. Be sure that when it's clipped on there, it's at least 18 inches from the battery. Now, check the cables to be sure they're not near drive belts or the fan or any pulleys.
It's all clear here.
All right.
Okay, Dad.
Good. Now we're ready to start the engine in the vehicle with the good battery. We'll let it run for 2 or 3 minutes, then we'll start the engine in the car that has the bad battery. Go to it. All right, now that this engine is started and it seems to be running okay, we can disconnect the cables. We do that in reverse order. Okay, so the black one comes off the clamp, the black one comes off your battery. Go, Jess. Your turn, Scott. Now the red one. And Scott undoes the last one.
That's it.
And that's all there is to it. There's only one area of vehicle maintenance that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the under-the-vehicle maintenance.
Oh, joy.
Not to worry, Jess. I'm just going to tell you about what goes on when you take your vehicle to the dealership so that you'll know what's happening to
So
it.
that means we don't have to do them?
Well, they all require lifting the vehicle in the air, and because we don't have a hoist in the driveway, although Scott has been doing some measuring lately, there really is one under-the-vehicle maintenance check that you can do, though, and that's to be on the outlook for fluid drips where the car is parked. Now, these leaks need to be repaired by your dealer, but you can avoid a lot of unnecessary damage by spotting a leak soon enough.
You know, Dad, you've shown us so many different fluids to check. How do I recognize which one is leaking?
All right, Scott, basically there are only two different kinds of fluids. There are oils and water-based. Now, your engine oil is sort of honey-colored. If it's been used in the vehicle for a while, it'll be a little darker. The automatic transmission fluid is red, very much like cough syrup. Now, your engine coolant is water and ethylene glycol-based antifreeze, which will appear to be yellowish green or maybe even greenish red, depending on the manufacturer and what angle the light is striking it from.
Okay, but what about those clear puddles of water that you see underneath vehicles?
Well, that's probably just drippings from the air conditioning, and that's considered to be normal. Now, all the rest of the under-vehicle service has to be done by the dealership, and they put the car up on a hoist so that they can get underneath to do all these things easily and quickly. While they've got the car up in the air, they can change the oil and the oil filter. They can lubricate all the grease fittings, and those vary from vehicle to vehicle, but the dealership has charts so that they know exactly where to locate each one of them. Front drive axles have rubber boots to keep out dirt, and those have to be checked for tears and cracks and replaced as required. Then rear drive cars and vehicles with four-wheel drive have drive axles that have to have the lubricant level checked. So does the transfer case on four-wheel drive vehicles and the manual transmission on rear-wheel drive vehicles. Now, while the technician is under your car, he's also going to check out your exhaust system for leaks and corrosion. And it's a good idea to have those things repaired right away before they get so rusty that the corrosion makes excessive noise or leaks. They'll also take a look at the suspension system and check out the shock absorbers and the McPherson struts for leaks and damage. Because if those aren't operating properly, it does have an effect on the ride and the handling of the car, also on tire tread life. They'll also take a look at your tires, check them for damage, for normal wear and for abnormal wear.
You know, I guess I did learn something after all. Thanks a lot, Dad.
And I never dreamed there were so many things to check to keep my new car operating properly.
But now you do know, and it's all just part of your responsibility to see to it that your new Chevrolets work the way they're supposed to. And that's why we call it personal attention.